Good morning and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Funding Carbon Capture and Storage in Central and Eastern Europe, focus on Poland, organized by NZIA Task Force. My name is Tamara Lagurashvili. I'm a Director of Central and Eastern Europe at NZIA Task Force, and I will be moderating today's session. A little bit about NZIA Task Force, or CATF. NZIA Task Force is a global climate organization which was founded in 1996 with headquarters in Boston and offices in DC and Brussels, and global staff working from all around the world. We are working to catalyze pragmatic climate solutions against some of the worst impacts of the climate change, and we do that by changing the narrative, technology, business models, and the policy. And why we are here to discuss a little bit more the setup of today's session. First, a little bit of the housekeeping rules. So today we have 90 minutes for the discussion. We will first go into a little bit of framing for today's conversation. Then my colleague Cody Rossi will share a short slides to further frame the conversation, after which we will dive deep into the moderated panel discussion for about 1 hour, and then we will have approximately 10 to 15 minutes in the end to answer the questions from the audience. So I would like to encourage everyone joining us virtually to post your questions in the Q&A section all throughout the webinar, and we will be picking them up a little bit later. So thank you again very much for joining. So what's in store for today's discussion? Poland, like many other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, is facing significant challenges to meet the climate goals and retain the industrial competitiveness. And obviously it is even more so in case of Poland, as Poland is dubbed as the industrial powerhouse of Central and Eastern Europe, decarbonizing in its industrial base while retaining competitiveness and delivering on energy and economic security is very important. In the portfolio of the solutions, one of the key technologies is carbon capture and storage. However, financing the CCS is one of the key challenges, and creating a credible business case to scale up the CCS deployment is something that is often held up basically for the CCS deployment. So understanding actually how the proposed projects can go to the final investment decisions would be one of the crucial aspects of today's conversation. Today, we try to bring together a diverse set of stakeholders to inform the conversation about how those funding models can actually be nurtured in a way that can help Poland take the CCS deployment to the next level. So today we will be discussing what funding streams and capacities already exist at the EU level, how they can be best matched with the national level funding, how the private capital and the industry play a crucial role in the process, and also equally importantly, how the Polish government can come up with the durable policies informed by the global learnings, but really anchored into the local context. So to discuss this and much more today, we have a distinguished panel, and I'm really happy to introduce them to you. We have Alexander Szygotsky from Reform Institute, Agnieszka Baran, Pierre Orland, Daniel Kicza, European Commission, Paweł Gladys, University of Science and Technology in Krakow, Simon Bielinski, Ministry of Climate and Environment of Poland, and Cody Rossi from NZIA Task Force. Thank you very much for joining today's discussion. And to you, Cody.
Yes, thank you very much, Tamara, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. I'm just going to give a short presentation to set the scene, as Tamara said, about how and why Poland needs CCS, but then also what Poland can do to really get these first set of projects off the ground. So as you can see from the slide here, Poland has a significant number of heavy industrial sectors that make up a large portion of the Polish economy, but also a large portion of EU emissions. Poland is the third largest emitter in the EU, approximately 10.5% of the total GHG emissions in the EU as a whole. As we can see from the developments in the EU emissions trading system, free allowances are due to be phased out. There will be an increasing carbon price, as much as the carbon price at the moment is hovering around levels lower than needed to stimulate CCS or incentivize it in most applications, this price is likely to increase over time. So Polish industries really do need to eliminate their CO2 emissions over the next decade, and past that, or risk really paying a higher carbon price. So to ensure Poland's industries remain competitive, carbon capture and storage must be deployed at scale. And now we'll just go on to a little bit more of a sectoral breakdown where we can see where CCS is needed. And maybe just to say a little bit about, I'm sure most of the people here know why CCS is important, but it's always good just to revisit that. And CCS really is a cost-competitive solution across a wide variety of industrial processes to cut emissions. In Poland at the moment, the majority of the emissions are coming from the energy sector and the large coal-fired fleet. But we can see that these emissions will be phased out over time with the coal phase out. The harder to abate industries such as the cement and lime, iron and steel, refineries and chemicals do not really have the same amount of options as just phasing out coal power. These industries make up the backbone of the products which are needed to build renewable energy, such as steel and concrete. And they're also products and industries that we will need in the future. So if we need these industries in the future, we need to find a way to keep them competitive, but also to keep them green and low carbon. And these industries employ around 400,000 workers to Poland, and that's a proportionally higher than the EU average industrial gross value add. So it really just shows just how important these industries are to Poland. It also offers an economic opportunity in the form of producing low carbon or zero carbon products, as well as allowing Polish industries to then be able to provide those products to not only the EU market, but to Polish customers as well. So creating Polish jobs with Polish net zero products. Now, in terms of our industries and locations, where in the next slide we'll see how there's a large cluster of Polish industries, particularly the cement and lime industry in the south of the country. And Poland has quite a large theoretical storage potential of around 15 billion tons. Now, this is the upper bound of that. There's still a lot of work to be done in finding out and assessing these storage sites to make sure that they are usable and the injectivity of CO2 will work and will work at the scale and speed needed. However, really looking at this cluster of emissions down in the south, we can see that it is really ripe for creating industrial clusters for CCUS, where we can connect all of these emitters together and create economies of scale. But really, to be able to deploy CCS to these industries in the south of the country and to enable especially the cement and lime industry to be able to have the tools to decarbonize, where CCS is the only way to really ensure that the entire production process is net zero, then we do need to deploy CCS. So where are we going to store this CO2? Well, as we can see from this, there is a bit of a gap around the south of the country. There are some storage locations, but really the country does not suffer from a lack of possible storage resources. The main issue here is about creating projects that are able to amalgamate and collect CO2 from a wide variety of emitters and then be able to transport that CO2 either for export or for offshore storage above Gdansk or to a number of storage sites across the country. And the theoretical potentials are mostly in saline aquifers, but there's also some potential to store CO2 in hydrocarbon fields. There is a small amount of potential in coal seams, but this is really not large enough to warrant storing it in there. And there's also some other issues around that. Now, in the next slide, we can see the real issue and financing challenges that don't just apply to Poland, but also to countries across Europe and trying to deploy CCS. And really, CCS has suffered from a lack of adequate policy and funding supports. And what we can see that as being a serious barrier to the business case, which is often cited as the main reason for not developing projects. Right now, the EU ETS is the main driver of decarbonisation in industrial sectors, but it's just not enough to be able to fund CCS projects with a large amount of CapEx and OpEx needed. So if we delay CCS deployment until those ETS prices are high enough, we'll have, for one, more cumulative emissions, but then also these industries will have to be spending OpEx on paying that carbon price, where they could have been avoiding it by having CCS deployed. So if we can now look on to the some of the solutions that are being offered to this across Europe. And one of those, at least most popular that we can see at the moment, is the carbon contracts for difference. And we can see these being deployed, or at least suggested now, in a number of countries. The Netherlands, with its SDE++ mechanism, was one of the first. The UK as well, with its ICC contracts, also has already deployed this. But we can now see that France, in its carbon management strategy, as well as Germany and Austria, are exploring this funding model. And really what this does is it allows revenue certainty, attracts investment, and gives long-term viability and assurance that there will be a off-taker and that there will be a balance to cover the prevailing cost gap. And in the next slide, there is a overview of these three kind of mechanisms. We also have Denmark as well. We can see the amount of funding that has been allocated to these funds, and it is quite a considerable amount. 23 billion euros in the Netherlands and 20 billion in the UK. And what we can see is that these are being designed over kind of a long enough times of 15 to 10 years, or up to 20 years in the case of Denmark. And that reference price in the European countries, or those countries in the EU, is set to be the EU ETS price, whereas in the UK, it's predetermined linearly and increases over 10 years, with then the UK ETS coming in at a later time. We also have a brief on this, which goes into this in much more detail. And just quickly in the next slide, we can see the structure of one of these funding mechanisms and how over time that the actual government actually ends up kind of breaking even depending on the reference price and the strike price. So what we can see is that this kind of model covers that early CapEx, and then later on that CapEx shortfall period is then covered, and this runs here from 10 years and includes transport and storage charges as well. But if we're now to look at the issue of Poland in particular, is that these large funding mechanisms are quite expensive, and it's not always the case where you could imagine this being deployed all across Europe for the long term. So I just want to move on to maybe some EU funding opportunities. And the idea behind this here is just to give you a sense of, in Poland, there are really a wide variety of other funding mechanisms at the EU level that can come in and support such a funding mechanism. So obviously the Innovation Fund is the main one, with up to 60% of relevant costs covered. There are more that maybe have not received the attention that they deserve, such as the Recovery and Resilience Fund facility, and the Just Transition Fund, of which there are a number of areas in the south of Poland which are actually covered in and applicable for that scheme. So what we can see from this is that there's actually quite a lot of funding available that could be combined with a carbon contract for difference, and also some of these EU funds can actually be combined with themselves. So the only issue really I see here is that there is large application processes that can be quite lengthy. It's also a bit of a maze of trying to navigate this EU funding. And I'm sure we can get into this over the panel discussion. So where do we kind of go from here? There are also some other options as well beyond EU funding, such as green financing. And the main institution that we can see playing a role here is European Investment Bank, and they can offer loans, equity investments, and guarantees to mobilize some additional private funding. And also the institution of the EIB can provide free financial advice, as well as helping to improve the bankability and readiness of these early stage low carbon projects. There's also the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which can provide direct finance through loans, equity investments, and guarantees. We can also see that governments can also play a role in backing up or providing loan guarantees or tax breaks to these projects as well. So really, there's quite a lot of ways in which targeted facilities such as these, which are priced below market terms or offer green bonds at lower interest rates, or also known as a greenium, can really help stimulate private capital, because it's not only going to be able to all be done with government funds or EU funds. It's really a coming together of all these different resources, which is how we're going to be able to build a lasting and durable business case for these early projects. So I just want to maybe just wrap up with a few recommendations. As we know that, well, CCS is essential for Poland to meet its climate targets, but also to maintain its industrial competitiveness. The EU ETS price is not yet high enough to make these projects financially viable. But if we can secure this funding for these early stage CCS projects, it really will establish this backbone of CO2 infrastructure, which can lower costs for other projects, but as well as allow for the scaling up of funding across, the scaling up of CCS across the country. So really what we need to be looking at is integrating EU funding with national measures, such as carbon contracts for difference, to complete the business case, as well as looking at these other options, such as using government-backed guarantees and financial instruments as green bonds, and then using coordination. And perhaps this is a role here for government in order to get these projects off the ground by aligning existing national or new national funds with existing EU funds. So I'll leave it there. I'm really excited to discuss and get into how we can make this business case for CCS in Poland a reality. Thank you. I think you're on mute there, Tamara.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Cody, very much. And I would like to invite now the speakers to turn on their cameras. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I think we will get into the nitty-gritties of some of the things that you have outlined, Cody, and we also have some questions coming up, and I would like to encourage also the speakers to answer them, but we will have some time in the end for that. So I think kind of a smooth transition from your presentation, Cody, would be the first question to you, Simon. As Cody outlined, there's already some policy instruments, the financing instruments being designed, and we also see countries like France and Austria are also at the forefront right now in the carbon management strategy, which has been just very newly released. So it would be very interesting to understand from the Ministry of Climate and Environment side, what policy support does the ministry envision to enhance the CCS deployment in Poland? And obviously a big issue of that is the further update of the geological and mining law. There is a lot of anticipation around that. So if you could also give maybe a little bit of timeline of the anticipated updates and the policies that you have envisioned in the coming months and years.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation for today's conference. When it comes to the CCS in Poland, I think we are in a different place than the countries that were indicated in the presentation. Of course, we discussed about the CCS for years. However, the transformation of Poland, transformation of our industry is a long and difficult process. We have some problems that other countries do not have. So that's why we need to divide this transformation process and focus sometimes on different activities. However, when it comes to the CCS, we are aware that CCS will be very important factor for for our economy to achieve the climate goals, especially when it comes to the all chemical sector, petrochemical sector, or industries that are use a lot of energy. So that's why the steel production. So that's why we need to prepare the strategy. What I think it's the first step that we would like here in the ministry to prepare it is to prepare the strategy for the CCS and CCUS. And would like to prepare the strategy with cooperation with the industry. But we also are now working on our climate and energy plan, and this is the main document for other transformation strategies. So that's why we still waiting for to finish the work on energy and climate plan, and then of course parallel, we work on the CCS strategy, but then we will know what our goals are, and we will be able to adjust our CCS strategy. However, of course, in Poland, there are some first pilot projects about CCS, and we are aware that what will be the most challenging is to find a place for storage of CO2. Because as for today, Baltic Sea, we cannot storage CO2 on Baltic Sea because there is an international convention that forbid us to storage CO2. We can store CO2 only for the pilot project. Of course, we would like to we discuss to storage the CO2 onshore, but there is a problem of public acceptance for this solution, and of course we need to change the regulation about the storage onshore on land CO2. We are working on this regulation because there is we see that there is need to be changed, and I think in next few months in autumn we'll be able to introduce the project into public consultation, because all the analytic works have been done, and now our colleagues from geological department are preparing the regulation, preparing the suggestion where we can storage the CO2 in Poland. And I think for this year it will be the most important document for the industry and for the CO2 capture and storage.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Simon. Definitely, I think it's a very hot season for all the strategic updates, NSCP including. So definitely very much looking forward to that. Daniel, maybe going next to you, one of the things that Cody also mentioned in his presentation is that there is actually a wealth and no scarcity of the EU funding opportunities out there. But sometimes the accessibility to them could be an issue. So I think from your perspective, could you please tell us a little bit more how best the stakeholders, both the national governments like Poland, but also others in the CE and wider Europe, and also the project developers can navigate and access those funds in a much more streamlined and easier way?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's I think a just criticism that EU funding is not easy to understand from an applicant's point of view, and there are different pots. I think what's even more important to not forget is that some of these funds that you mentioned, for instance, the RRF, the Resilience and Recovery Facility, these are things which are underpinned by plans which have been already negotiated years before and now are being executed. And it's not usual that, let's say, 3 years ago or during a COVID crisis, lots of people have thought about putting CCS into those plans, and therefore it might not be as easy as it sounds on paper to get access to these plans. Having said that, I think there are two important messages were already in Cody's slides. We have two important funding instruments that anyone can apply to if a project is there. So if someone has a project, one is the Innovation Fund. Yes, the Innovation Fund is very much oversubscribed, but CCS has still a good chance to support a good project, because you reduce a lot of emissions with CCS projects, and that counts for good points in the methodology of the Innovation Fund. To give you just a little hint, we closed the call in April. We had 4 billion euros sort of in the call. We received 337 applications, out of which 62 were related to what we now call industrial carbon management, which is what usually was called CCUS. Almost half of it sort of for capturing, for storing roughly 26 million tons of CO2. That are projects in Europe, all around Europe, that are ready to capture these kind of emissions and store them. But they need support. They come to us. Now, there is no chance with 4 billion euros that we will fund all of those 62 or even a lot of them. But it shows the need, and it shows also the willingness of industries to do that. The second funding instrument is the Connecting Europe Facility, CEF, where when it comes to transport infrastructures, but not just transport, also storage infrastructures are eligible. Of course, CEF funding is always useful, more useful when it is cross-border, because it's a cross-border instrument. So that's another aspect. But I think let's call a spade a spade. We have said in our strategy that we see there is roughly 10 billion euros under finance in order to get all those emissions that could already be captured and stored really be captured in the first place, and then stored is a whole different story. So in that sense, it's indeed a question of investments. In a way, the way we look at it is it's an investment into the future of an industrial site. And it's a long-term investment into the future of an industrial site. So it has lots of, let's say, other variables around it, whether the site should stay, whether the site is the one that needs to have a future, etc., etc. But if that's so, then it's an investment that's worth making, provided there is a storage site that can be accessed. And I think here we have at least made the projects a little bit easier by now having enforced the Net Zero Industry Act, in which we have mandated the oil and gas industry to build 50 million tons of annual injection capacity by 2030 in the European Union. And that again can unlock again projects. Why? Because anyone who builds a project around that date with this target should then be recognized as a strategic net zero project by the member states in which that happens. Meaning faster permitting, 18 months permitting for all permits that are needed to operate these sites. That can include capture sites, that can include the transport infrastructure that is needed to go to the storage site and the storage site. So these could be huge projects that can be designed. We anticipate that they will be designed sort of with a cluster logic attached to them. So not, let's say, in places where not a lot of emitters are around. So that's definitely one thing that needs to be taken into account. But we believe that there is a reason for private investors to invest into these companies and into these projects, because they will have a long-term role to play for the decarbonization of the industry in several member states. And if they are sort of smartly located, I think they can have we believe they can have a break-even point with actual customers shipping their CO2 to the sites right around 2030.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel, for outlining Innovation Fund, CEF, obviously the 2030 target that we will go back in the second round of questions, and some of the challenges, especially for the oversubscribed funds, and how the project developers can tap into the alternative funds. And so who better to come in for this conversation if not Agnieszka Baran from Orlen. Obviously, Orlen is a major industrial player, not only in Poland, but in wider Central and Eastern Europe. Some of the flagship projects on hydrogen, on CCS, and many other innovative technologies. So Agnieszka, could you talk a little bit about the challenges on the ground that Orlen is currently facing in developing and implementing CCS projects?
Yes, of course. Thank you for this question. I think this is the most common question I get every time and on every panel. I'm not saying it's bad. No, it's very good, but I'm gonna be boring because I'm gonna tell all the same thing I'm telling all the time. So there are three, even I can say now four, let's say, maybe not problems, but issues. First is regulation. When we were on the beginning of our project, of our program, we have prepared such a, let's say, such a book with the list of regulation of acts that are against, maybe not against, that are stopping the implementation of CCS in Poland. And it was a book with over 150 pages, something like that. We know that 1 year ago, more or less, there was a change of the mining and geological law. It's not perfect, but it has been changed, so it's very good. But since then, nothing has changed, to be honest. We are still dealing with the some local, not national, let's say, acts like location of storage act, where you should place the information about where you can make, when you can store in Poland, and it's still the same. So at this moment, we can do only the demo projects on the Baltic Sea. We are dealing also with the regulation regarding the characteristic of CO2. I don't know whether you all know, but in our actual current law, there is information. There is a table with three different options for the CCS, for carbon capture, especially, in which there is information that level of water content is about the 0.0001%. So which technology can achieve that? Maybe not all of them, maybe one, maybe even none. So this is the second thing. And also we are dealing right now with the Net Zero Industry Act. As Daniel said, this is some kind of, let's say, trigger to implement storage in the countries. Of course, I don't have anything against that, and I fully agree. However, if we are making some kind of trigger, there should be some kind of help for the countries that need to implement that. As Szymon Doliński said, it's going to be very hard for Poland to implement CCS on site, I mean on land, because people are afraid. They do not know anything about CCS technology. It means that any kind of CCS activity should be implemented on the Baltic Sea. Now we cannot do that. When you're gonna see especially when society gonna see that, let's say, Germany and all of the countries are focusing more on, maybe not only, but mostly on the offshore storage, and we as a country gonna say that, no, we're gonna do onshore storage. How do you think? Whether they gonna accept that or not? It's the answer is quite obvious, but okay, that's the biggest problem. So the regulation. The second was exactly the social awareness, because people do not know, maybe not anything, but they do not know much about the technology. We made some kind of verification of knowledge of people, and they used to mix CO2 with CO. And they used to say there's gonna be some kind of explosion of the stored CO2. They do not want to have it on land. They do not want to have it next to their buildings. And sometimes they are mixing CCS with the shoe, let's say, company in Poland. So it's quite obvious that the knowledge of this technology in people's mind is very, very low. And the third issue is financing aspects. Cody in his presentation showed some of the possibilities of making the financial support for the companies. I fully agree. For European Union, there is a lot of possibilities to take the money into your pockets. It's just about knowing how to do that. I mean, knowing the regulation of the EU funding, and that's all. But when we are talking about the national some kind of funding, we do not have any. Of course, I fully understand that we couldn't implement the CCS technology because of the law, and I know it's quite obvious that we cannot have any, let's say, funding from the government because of that. But now when we, let's say, maybe not fully can implement this technology into our assets, but now we should have some help, and it should be somehow divided into the help for the projects are, let's say, are on the PCI list. As Daniel just said, there is projects which are, let's say, on the PCI list, and which are let's say very and at the some kind of phase of implementation, they should have some additional funding or some kind of help from the government, and then all of other projects can possess some additional help. But at this moment, these three aspects are the most difficult for implementing the CCS in Poland. Of course, in my opinion, somebody can not agree with me.
Thank you, Agnieszka. This has been very, very helpful. And I think one of the key issues that you have outlined, the public perception, obviously it's not unique to Poland, but for most of the countries, especially for the new technology. So I think it would be very interesting for the second round of questions, but also to understand from the government, civil society, industry, what kind of efforts are being made and needs to be made to have a little bit more streamlined, I think, cooperation on this very important issue. So thank you very much for outlining the challenge there. Pavel, next to you, maybe CCUS.pl, a flagship project, which is basically redefining the CCS and trying to really have very positive strides in Poland on more awareness, but also actual implementation of the projects, also the structured collaboration, and helping Poland to get some of the learnings from the countries who are or the first movers in this regard. Could you talk a little bit, maybe for the audience, what CCUS.pl is all about and what inspired this project, and actually how it is helping to move the needle on the ground?
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you again, Tamara, for invitation. And for this question, well, regarding the idea for the project, it was brought to us as the AGH Center for Energy, something around 2020. And when the first signs of the CCS renaissance in Europe were already visible, it was also slightly associated with the soon to be acknowledged by all of us, the increase in the EU ETS. But also back then, one of the ministries in Poland, which was working on the goals of 2050 net zero targets for Poland, acknowledged the fact that it is not possible to actually be net zero in 2050 without CCS. And back then, more precisely, it was about bioenergy CCS and other carbon dioxide removal options, right? But as something natural, it was associated with the CCUS value chain. So we were approached, actually also I have to acknowledge Aleksander Śniegocki, who back then was also supporting us in development of this project. We were approached and asked to consider building or developing such a project in order to support the ministries and government. So the previous interest, the wave of interest for CCS in Poland ended something around 2015, when the large CCS, technical CCS projects have ended up. But then the price of CO2 emission allowance was extremely low, so it was not economically feasible. We also had a fiasco of Bełchatów CCS project. And so taking all of this, the capacity that was built, the knowledge that was on the Polish market about CCS was very, very low. So we, aside of the main goals, we look and we view ourselves as a knowledge providers for Polish stakeholders, right? We need to make sure that this knowledge is brought back to the industry. We also want to facilitate and support the clustering ideas, which Daniel also already mentioned, right? That this is the way to do CCS right now. Back then in Poland, we were all rather thinking about, well, the CCS would be one emitter, one pipeline, one storage site, right? Now everything is clustering, and this is also something that we are working on. We're trying to show the added values from building partnerships. We also try to get all of those stakeholders together, not only for the emission side, but also in terms of who will transport the CO2 and who and where we could store the carbon dioxide. We also try to look, of course, at the utilization option as well. So in trying to wrap it up, the most important part of the project is to rebuilding the capacities to actually think seriously about CCS in Poland. And I hope we did this in the last years. Aside of this, of course, the project itself goals are associated with two things that should be stressed here. One is the actual strategy for the CCUS deployment in Poland. And such a strategy is being developed by us, by Visa Europe Institute. Some of the findings have already been sent to the Ministry of Economic, to the Ministry as our partner, as our implementing entity within our project. We are meeting next week in order to discuss further some of the relevant issues actually associated with the funding. Because aside of the strategy itself, we are also obliged to provide a legal framework for the legal acts in Poland that could support the uplift of the CCS. And for us right now, taking into account the area in which we work and the requirements from the industry and what can be achieved quite quickly, we are looking towards actually proposing a legal framework for Poland for carbon contract for differences. And so before end of the year, such a proposition that will be hopefully also supported by the ministry, this should be something that will be as one of the outcomes of our project. And to all of the things that Agnieszka mentioned, public acceptance, we're also trying to do our work there, right? But we are still under a specific umbrella of a project that was designed in 2020. So also a lot of things change. We try to keep the flexible approach, but of course we are in a certain limits. But we are looking forward to new opportunities that hopefully will soon arise in terms of how we can further support the CCUS deployment in Poland.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paweł. And Aleksander, as you have been referenced also as one of the CCS champions, so to say, by Paweł from the early days, could you share, I think it would be also interesting to weave the public perception in all of the answers coming through, because it's just such an important topic. But from the civil society perspective, where do you see the carbon capture playing its role in the energy transition in Poland?
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, I think that civil society in Poland is quite broad. So you will have environmental NGOs, local community organizations, which are often concerned about investments in their backgrounds, but also think tank community, also cooperation with business associations. So there's a very broad set of stakeholders with different views. Maybe I can start with some of the common maybe criticism or risks in perception. I think one of them is indeed the issue of basically not making CCS as a kind of red herring, something which comes in 5, 10, 15 years, and which will save the whole energy system, so we don't need to implement other elements, which we obviously know is not the case, that we need to act in many technologies, and CCS is important for reaching net zero. But in the past, experiences in the past with CCS or with nuclear and other technologies makes many in civil society in Poland skeptical that there's like an earnest drive to actually implement this, rather than just say that we're going to keep burning fossil fuels for another 20, 30, 40 years. So this is a very legitimate concern in terms of communicating and making sure that there's trust in the process. Another issue would be indeed making sure that this is indeed fair competition with other technological options, that there is no also efficient from the perspective of taxpayer. So this is just not a transfer to companies without any competition, for instance, which once again, this is a typical concern. It's very natural that large industrial companies will implement CCS, but obviously we should be mindful about making sure that there is transparency, there is a sense of getting the results which we are paying for. I think that there's also a kind of a very Polish-specific risk that the discussion about how to implement CCS is not sidelined once again by discussion on coal. So everyone in industry community, in think tanks, understands that CCS is for industrial emissions and maybe for some very hard to abate elements in power sector, which usually will be gas. But for political reasons, for just making sure that, like, indeed providing kind of sense of false hope, we see that sometimes there is kind of resurging spectrum of clean coal, which somehow is going to allow us to mine coal to keep the subsidized mining jobs for many years to come, which would be very, once again, unproductive when it comes to actually designing policies which actually deliver the projects, which actually allow Polish economy to decarbonize. So with that, I think that there's a very important set of solutions indeed in communicating and in governance of the transition. So I think it was already mentioned, and Pavel mentioned this already, on target-based policymaking. So CCS makes sense if you want to actually achieve net zero, if you want to achieve deep reductions. Whereas, let's say, honestly, not many co-benefits of doing this. So to be really consistent in terms of why we want to have CCS and that it aligns with other options, you need to say, okay, when we want to reach net zero or how much we want to contribute to net zero target. And that provides you with clarity, and that provides you with consistency when you talk about CCS. So this is like a fundamental issue that you can't really have large-scale complicated policy mix covering CCS, or let's say carbon management strategy, if you don't have a clear plan for the overall economy. Otherwise, you always will have questions, why do we need to do that much in CCS? Second thing indeed is transparency and open process and competitive process, for especially for next of a kind investments. Maybe for first of a kind, it's important to get them going. But overall, there also needs to be a sense that this is, once again, paying for effects and outcomes in reductions of emissions. And then with transparency and highlighting the importance of these technologies and openness for competition between technologies is also important, because then you can say credibly that, well, this is indeed a cost-efficient option. It gets support it's get necessary support, and it's necessary to maintain jobs in the region, which once again, I think that sometimes we may be we are too afraid maybe sometimes to push forward with changes, investments on the local level, just to argue that very important. We shouldn't maybe do this from year one to the second one, but rather to treat it as a process. So, okay, let's start with Baltic storage, but let's also work with communities where we see potential carbon storage sites on the ground, and let's not be afraid to approach them. And the more transparent, the more clear target-based, the more competitive process there is on the national level to implement CCS, the easier then it's to argue that this is something which indeed will be also beneficial and necessary for local communities. So with that, I'll maybe put a stop. Thank you.
That has been very insightful, Alex. Thank you very much. Communicating clearly and streamlined communication, target-based approach, and transparency, competitive process, and not to be afraid to engage with the local communities and really understanding what are the issues they're facing and how the challenges might be overcome with more streamlined communication. Thank you very much. And Cody, to get to you and just maybe going back to your presentation on the funding, could you share a little bit more based on the conversations that we have been hearing, some unique challenges that Poland is facing? What are some of the other financing mechanisms to actually successfully bridge this cost gap and help to build up the business models? Once again, bearing that one size doesn't fit all, and there are some unique challenges that will need to be taken into account for Poland and wider CE region.
For sure, Tamara. Yeah. No, I think the unique challenge for Poland is not just unique to Poland itself, but rather the CE region, is that, you know, there isn't as much, you could say, money in the pot to be given to, say, government schemes like carbon contracts for difference, right? As well, you know, one thing we have to take into account is that, well, it costs X amount to capture CO2 at the point source of steel or cement, let's say, and that really doesn't change where you do it, right? Obviously, it can change slightly depending on the production process or the facility itself, but really that cost is down to thermodynamics, and so that same cost of capture is going to also apply in Poland. The only difference is that there's less government funding available to actually be able to support this. And what we can see is that there's a large need in Poland for CCS. So how do we kind of bridge that cost gap then? Is, as I was saying in the presentation, there are government EU funding that can play a role here. And actually, even if we look at some of those front-runner countries, such as the Netherlands or even Norway, those successful projects like Northern Lights and Porthos received a mix of national subsidies, but also direct government grants, EU funding, and as well as those permitting enablers, such as the Connecting Europe facility and projects of common interest, all those good things that can help accelerate a project. But in Poland itself, there are other ways that we can go about this. I mean, only 50% of ETS revenues in Poland have been spent on climate purposes. There's a large amount of money there, which should, under the ETS, be going to climate projects, right? And what we can see, and as Daniel mentioned, is that, yes, some of those pots of money, such as the Recovery and Resilience Fund or Just Transition Fund, are based on plans which have been made years ago. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately for those countries, but maybe unfortunately for those that have not planned yet or at that time for CCS, is that, you know, Croatia, Greece, Belgium, these countries gave out hundreds of millions from that fund for CCS projects or wider industrial decarbonization. So if we're looking forward, when are they, under the next commission or in the next EU budget, if we do see these kind of large funds being created for whatever reason, we really need to have this integrated planning in place, where we can have in NECPs or even just a carbon management strategy that lays out the need, and then the governments can say, okay, well, what kind of pool of funding can we pull in here? Can we instigate a project ourselves, as well as support those projects that are already happening? So yes, I think there is a wide variety of things that we can do here, but I just want to come in maybe just briefly on the onshore storage aspect as well, because I think, yes, it's fine if we get projects funded, it's great even, but if these projects can't get built due to public acceptance issues, well, then what's going to happen? We can't have another lost decade. It's just too much CO2 will be emitted. And also for Poland, if you don't get these projects going, what are you going to do? Export all your CO2 to Norway and have your industries paying a serious, what our own research has shown, 300% higher costs than those that are near the North Sea. It's just uncompetitive and it's not going to work. So for onshore storage, I think really you need to start communicating early. The government needs to have an active role, but not just from the national level, but also down to the very local level. You need to find local champions that are trusted by their communities, help educate them, bring them along this process and have them communicate to the local communities. We're seeing onshore storage projects now going ahead with licenses given in Denmark. Austria is exploring onshore storage as part of their carbon management strategy, as is France. Croatia has a number of onshore storage projects proposed and going quite well. And what we can see as well from even Germany, the long-term skeptic of onshore storage or CO2 storage in general, actually giving a choice to their federal states whether or not they want to allow onshore storage. And for me, being in the NGO space, seeing that NGOs are actually now supportive, at least some of the most critical for onshore storage, because they would rather see it stored onshore where it's not kind of where they don't perceive risks to marine life, which are very, very small. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It is a major barrier, but I don't think it is one that is not able to kind of get over, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Cody. Very nice positive note for the first round of the question as well. And I think it would be also interesting to hear from the second round from Agnieszka, but as well from Simon, what are some of the government efforts at the national, but also, as you mentioned, regional level to identify those early champions to help speed up the curve. I would like to encourage everybody joining to post the questions. We actually have questions that I would want to make sure to ask the panelists. If there is a question specifically addressed to you, please feel free to answer them in writing. If not, we will get back to them very shortly. Simon, getting back to you as well. So some of the issues addressed by Daniel, Cody, Agnieszka and Pavel on the wide spectrum of the financial barriers coming from the project developer perspective, from the industry perspective. So it would be interesting to understand from the government's perspective, how do you see or where do you see these financial barriers are for CCS deployment, and if there are any plans already in the making, either in the dedicated strategy or as a standalone project to address them?
Of course, I think what is, I can agree with other panelists, what is crucial and very important is our money. Yes, we need to find a way to finance all the projects, but I think when it comes to the CCS, it's not so easy, because what I think is for me was maybe not difficult to understand, but it's challenging that it's the cost effectiveness of CCS or CCUS is very depending on the cost of ETS. So if the cost of ETS are going up, the cost of CCS is the CCS will be easy for the companies, because the alternative costs of not investing in CCS is higher. But when I looked in some projection of cost of CCS and projection of ETS, so it depends on the scenario. There are also some scenarios that show us that if the cost of ETS will be low, so the investment cost in CCS when it comes from the point of view of industry is too high, and it's only to use economic only to look on the situation from economic point of view is senseless to invest in CCS because the costs are too high, the income is too low. So of course, it's very difficult to industry to make the decision. So I think what states should do in that situation is to decrease the risk of investment in CCS. So that's why the contract for difference could be very good solution, because what contracts the main assumption for contract for difference is to take the risk of the investment into technology to the state, yes, because there are different, of course, there are different solutions for contract for difference, but as the rule is that the state guarantees some price for the technology, so it helps to for the risk of the investment. But on the other side, I think so that's why we think about such solution, but there is a lot of other technologies that also needs to be supported. So in my opinion, I think also on the level of European Union, on the level of countries, maybe we should decide in which technology we would like to invest, which technology is the most important for this energy transition. Because I think it will be very difficult for Poland to support all the low emission technologies, all the clean energy technologies or clean industrial technologies. But it's not only a problem of Poland. I think it's also a problem of France, Germany, and other countries, because there is no country in the world that could afford to support all the technologies, because the energy transformation is costly and it's rather expensive. Of course, when we look to the goals that we have, so we would like to be zero emission economy. We fight with we try to tackle with all the climate changes. So this costs maybe are not so big, but on other hands, on daily basis, when we look at economy of all this investment, it's quite costly. So I think we should also discuss which technology we should use, or which technology is the most effective and efficient in the terms of the environment, but also in the terms of this financial aspect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shimon. So all of the above approach desirable, but there needs to be a very sensible economic trade-offs calculated in terms of which technologies can go ahead. I would be very curious actually to hear some of the insights from other panelists on that as well. Daniel, going back to you, in your earlier remarks, and I think most of the panelists obviously have mentioned Net Zero Industry Act, and you cannot really talk about CCS without having this big picture in the mind. A share of the obligated entities from Poland with the 50 million tons by 2030 is quite considerable. How do you think what needs to happen for those entities actually to meet their target, considering all the challenges that have been laid out in the previous round?
Yeah, thank you. There is no target for Poland in the Net Zero Industry Act. There is a target for companies, and there's no target for companies to do something in Poland either. So the companies have full flexibility to do it wherever. Of course, in the picture, or sort of in the context of our webinar here today, I think it would make sense to have an operational storage site in Poland for all the emissions that are in Poland that we are talking about. And I think in that sense, we are on the topic that we need to discuss. And I think the topic that it is very nicely discussed already, but just want to reaffirm that for the Commission, CCS is not an alternative. It's an add-on, and it's a necessary add-on, unfortunately. So, and it's an add-on to keep industry in Europe, or in Poland, or in Hungary, or in Germany, or in France, or in anywhere, and reach our targets. So if you want to combine those two things, it's an add-on, meaning that all the other things are needed. So what we have already said in our strategy is that when it comes to public acceptance, for instance, on onshore storage side, it makes a lot of sense if CCS is not taken as, oh, there is a company here, maybe even an oil and gas company that wants to do a storage site. Can you please come to a town hall meeting and we explain to you why that is a good idea? No, I think it makes a lot more sense to have a national energy and climate plan that sets out how the Polish economy will reach net zero. What are the steps towards that? And then on that basis, you will find a number of hard to abate emissions in your economy. We know that they are there, but you also know that, and we have seen your draft plan. So, and those need to be decarbonized in some form if you want to keep them. And then on that basis, I think then the question of financing, member state financing, I think it's also an important, and you raised it, you raised really the important challenge of member states, Shimon. It's very, I can only underline, but in a way, there are choices to make, because if you have an economy that also needs to build a lot of things, and you have cement plants and you want to keep them in order to not import cement, then maybe the choice of having a manufacturing plant for solar panels and compete with Chinese imports, it's maybe much more risky than supporting a cement plant to capture CO2 and finding a storage site sort of nearby, ideally, because that lowers costs. Of course, all this depends on the carbon price. We don't speculate about the carbon price, but no one thinks, as I haven't heard anyone saying to me in the last 3 years, that the carbon price will go down. So that's no one in the industry thinks that. So that's where I think the business case comes together, and also then the strategic interest of member states to support essential facilities. Maybe that's a pipeline into a cluster of industries. Maybe it's enabling this. Maybe it's supporting a public dialogue about how can we support, how can communities that take on the job for storing Polish emissions under their feet in order to decarbonize the Polish economy, how can they benefit from that? Can be recognized as such, that this is an important place and it's an important role to play, as it was maybe in mining regions 100 years ago or 150 years ago, where these became important regions because they found something very valuable, even though CO2 is not as valuable as the stuff that needs to be mined. So all of this, I think, is the picture that we are in, and we cannot sort of escape it. But I think what you all said is still true. So we need to work together on these things. So we do several things. If I just have 2 more minutes, I mentioned 3 of them. One of which is that we have an expert group of Polish and other permitting authorities for CO2 storage sites, and we want to make sure that they are all on the same page as to the advances that have been made in countries like Denmark, where they just issued exploration licenses last month for onshore sites and so on, in a direct way. And we put the colleagues there in contact with each other so that they can discuss this, so that storage site permitting is not something each member state needs to face on their own, but actually they can face it in a group of professionals, expert professionals that have done that already in other member states. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I know it again depends on money being available, but at least already with the results of this innovation fund call, as I mentioned, it's not likely that many of the projects will be all of the projects will be funded, but many of them will still be good, and they will be really good, and they would have been funded if we had more money in the call. So these projects, they are really good projects. They get what we call a step seal. It's based on another EU regulation. What it definitely means, what it is in essence means, is that it should make easier for member states to use, for instance, structural funds budgets to support these projects, and to avoid or to not have to do again a tendering process or a process where you would have to evaluate these projects, because these projects have done a lot of work to apply, and they have a solid project that we would have funded if we had the money. So that's the first small step. In our strategy, we have said that we would also consider, once the industry is ripe enough, to do an auction on captured CO2 for storage, maybe. Let's see. Maybe just captured CO2. But for the time being, there is no CO2 captured in the European Union. So it's a bit early to do that. But if that were to be done, it would definitely be done as an auction as a service, which again, unfortunately, a little bit of money, EU money would be there, but member states wouldn't have to organize it themselves. And with these EU level competition, member states also have some benefits in seeing that the projects really that they would support can compete on an EU level with the costs that they claim. My last point, I think the public perception is really critical, but I doubt that anyone in primary school needs to learn about CCS, honestly, because there are many things in our world that we depend on that not everybody understands the slightest bit, electricity, other things. So the question is, who needs to understand this and what needs to be understood? And I think the idea that one can reduce emissions without losing industrial jobs and trustworthy handling the CO2 and not releasing it to the atmosphere is a powerful idea that can be explained. And I think as soon as we have the first storage site operating, we are that close. Let's say next year, we hope maybe Northern Lights, then afterwards maybe Portos in the Netherlands. I think then we will also have the pictures and sort of the stories around where this actually happens. So far, you can see it only in Iceland, and it's very small amounts. But I think let's also in the national debates, let's focus on those stakeholders that need to understand the importance of this for the entire decarbonization effort of the economy, and then see how can we broaden the understanding of this in a more climate relevant or overall climate policy context, rather than now trying to educate everyone of the energy needs for capture technologies, which are huge, by the way. And capture is never the projects we fund, 10 million tons of capture in the Innovation Fund. We have seen all of them. For none of them, capturing CO2 is the first choice. It's the last choice. So you use all other levers they have, renewable energies, feedstock, other feedstocks, etc., etc. And then the rest emissions that they cannot get rid of, that's what's captured. Why? Because indeed, as someone asked the question in the chat, it's very expensive on a daily basis to capture CO2. And then let alone to transport it and store it is also not free. And that's sort of an extra cost that comes on top. But it's worthwhile doing if you have done a good job in decarbonizing or using all kinds of other innovations to decarbonize the rest of your operations already with other means.
Thank you, Daniel. A very refreshing perspective of who needs to understand and what needs to be communicated, and that countries don't really need to reinvent the wheel all the time, but like the collaboration among the countries to exchange the best practice. And I think you kind of already answered the question from Matt Werner about the Denmark, and if there is already any collaboration between Denmark and Poland on lessons learned. So thank you very much. I would like to go to Agnieszka, and I would like, considering the time and because we have some really good questions in the chat, I would like to ask the panelists maybe if they could give the answers within the 2 minutes time frame, if that's okay. So Agnieszka, by now we have talked about existing kind of the wishful thinking of the funding mechanism. From your perspective, from the PK and Orlen, to get the CCS projects going, what kind of financial mechanisms or incentives are most desirable and most beneficial for that matter?
To be honest, I think that it was already mentioned by Daniel and by Kodiros, but in general, I can say that the most important things are maybe not the only financial things, but the from our perspective is that what Szymon Beliński said, CCS is not for everyone. Let's be honest, and I assume that many companies are going to the government raising hands and we want money for implementation of our technologies and so on and so on. So there should be some kind of, let's say, at the government level, some kind of plan or whatever where this money goes to. So it's going to be easier for all of the companies to check whether it's good to implement CCS on their assets or not. So this is first, maybe not very, maybe not going to the question, but anyway. Second is that I also agree with Daniel Kicz about the social awareness. If some kind of oil and gas company go to the public and go to the, let's say, the local governments and say, hey guys, we want to make CCS, it's good for us, it's good for, I don't know, cement companies, and it's gonna be beneficial for the economical competitive of these companies, they're gonna say us, what? No, it's not about the, it's about the fact that this is a very fragile, let's say, topic, and it also should be at the government level to make this some kind of, let's say, social education. Let's say it was like, you know, we had a nuclear power discussion 10-20 years ago about whether to implement that or not. Everyone, most of people were against that, and after the government some kind of educational campaign, now most of people are for this technology, and it's easier to be implemented. I think that CCS is something like that, the same. As for the economical mechanism, I think that when you look at the Western Europe, you see that there is a pattern. So, I mean, there is EU funding, which were mentioned by colleagues. There is a national funding, which are in some countries, I don't know, CFD, CSD++, and other. It's good to have any, let's say, in the country, and then we've got the funds from companies. I know that right now, and I saw on the chat, banks are maybe not providing, but looking for some kind of offer for CCS technologies, CCS companies to show products, to offer some kind of products for this technology, but it is not for all of the technologies. I mean, it's only focused mostly on the transport, mostly on the storage, but what about the carbon capture, which is the most capex, which is the biggest cost of the capex for the whole value chain of CCS. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka, very much. And considering the time, rapid fire for Pavel and Alex. Alex, maybe we can start with you. We talked a lot about the finance, but obviously we need a robust policy in the place to attract the investment in the first place. What do you think from the policy perspective needs to happen to get the CCS right?
Yeah, so I think that just to reiterate the point that we need a national energy and climate plan, long-term strategy for all economy, and then based on that carbon management strategy, which basically lays out all the elements, so there's clarity what we're doing. Then on funding, I think that there's a common infrastructure, storage infrastructure, which we can support with CapEx money just to keep the system going. Then you have, and by the way, I think that it was already mentioned that we have also domestic funds from ETS, and I would just highlight that as we phase out free allowances, the new flow of funds coming from industry will be available, and it makes sense to maybe plan accordingly to maybe reinvest this into the decarbonizing industry. Once again, these are domestic funds, so this is a domestic decision. I would add also carbon contract solutions was also mentioned, but I would add maybe green public procurement. So you have an excellent graphics, and this is a common fact that you can have 1 or 2% more expensive infrastructure investment, while you have a decarbonized steel and cement, which will be 40 or 50% more expensive. So it's kind of no-brainer way to use existing money, which will flow in infrastructure investment to provide premium for this industries which supply the investments project with clean construction materials. And I think just a final point, I think recent results from Innovation Fund auctions for hydrogen show that if you have competitive process, you can actually award not that much support on top of all others, because on the company level, if you account for support given by demand with green premiums, if you account for support that offtake will be cheaper because you invest in supporting capex for storage infrastructure, you can actually keep the public money invested efficiently, while also providing this kind of competitive support and clarity and risk, decreasing risk related to ETS price fluctuation. So let's think in terms of policy mixes, let's think demand, supply across the supply and value chain. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, very much. Pavel, a far-side question. Based on your experience and the learnings of the working with the project developers in Poland, but also from abroad within the CCUS.pl, what are some of the business or investment plans that are required to get actually CCS projects a success?
Okay, thank you for that, and I will make it very short. I have never heard about Polish company that came to the government and asked for money for the CCS. The questions and they come and ask for the legal framework to actually do the business case. So this is for me the main important thing, is to establish the framework for the companies to investigate if they can make a business case out of this, and then let them do business, right? This is not charity, this is business as it is, if we actually allow them to do it. Then of course there are some risks, we should take them, for example via carbon contract for difference for the emitters, right? We can make a bet between the industry and the state, what is the actually, well, how the changes of EU ETS will go, right? But in a way this is just taking some of the risks away, and it is only makes sense if the whole value chain will be reasonably costed. And by that, I'm referring to the work of your actually work that you're presenting, Clean Air Task Force, about the change of price for the transport and storage without new pipelines and without the onshore storage possibilities. So right now, it also doesn't make sense to overinvest right now or give over opportunities before we again establish the framework to make a serious and maybe, I am trying to find the right word for this, a justifiable business for all stakeholders, including the public, right? So it's not about if it's going to be economically feasible or not, or what. There are hard to abate emissions. We cannot get rid of them. For some of them, CCS is cheaper than alternatives, at least for now, right? So let them make business out of this. And of course, I'm not saying no to trying to reach out for different funds, like coming from the EU, right? This is always a great idea. It's also a great learning experience for all the project developers, at least what we learned from them, that this was something challenging, but it was worth doing, even if they did not receive the funding, right? So this is the first thing. And on the other hand, I'm looking at the new money that Alex already mentioned coming from the EU ETS, coming from this sounds so obvious that those money should be returned to those industries, to not in a direct refunds, but to support, for example, some of the needed infrastructural investments. I don't see a reason right now why this could not be built like this. Of course, national budget have different needs in terms of general decarbonization or energy transformation. But I find this extremely unfair towards the industry that is supporting this and paying this and cannot get a simple framework for building another business case for them for the long term. And I think this is it.
Thank you, Pavel. I want to thank all of you for your very insightful comments, and just to honor the comments and the questions from our audience. So I will read some of them, and I would like to encourage the speakers, if you want to answer them, please just raise your virtual hand and I will get to you. Some comments from Matt Werner about the Denmark, that it's leading the way on the onshore storage, if there is any collaboration between Denmark and Poland on the public education of CCS. Pavel, I see you shaking your head.
At least from our knowledge, have not yet been established a cooperation within this specific, but we already are looking extremely with a great interest of how it's being done there, and we will definitely build such an opportunities for us, but also for our politicians in order to try to meet and discuss and learn more from Denmark and of course other countries as well.
Thank you.
In 2022, we had a presentation from the Danish colleagues about how they did these community engagement for preparing this onshore tender that then was launched. And I think the Polish colleagues were there in the meeting. So I think first contact has been established, and they know each other because they are in the same room, sometimes real room, sometimes virtual room.
Yes, such a meetings took place, but we're thinking already about more organized way to approach this. This is, for example, how we are trying to do this right now with Norway through our, for example, Polish-Norwegian CCS network.
Thank you, Pavel. That's very helpful. And another comment from Wojciech Lewandowski about the EBRD, that they are in the position also to provide the technical support for the companies considering CCS. That is very important as well. Matt Werner is asking the question about the public perception of the onshore storage, and actually if there is any credible data and information to back up this assumption. Pavel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I already sent a link to our webpage. Unfortunately, it's just right in Polish, just a summary of the latest public acceptance on CCS. I put it in the chat. And I also stated that soon we will have a full report with also English translation available before the end of the year. So you could learn more about 2 or 3 public perception studies that was done within the last 6-9 months.
Thank you so much. Monica is asking, and I will not pronounce her last name, not to butcher it, talking about the storage under the seabed of the Baltic. What about the Helsinki Convention and the fact that some of its members consider CO2 as waste?
I can answer this question. In general, countries are discussing about the Helsinki Convention because part of the country says that it's not forbidden to store the CO2, and part of them are saying that it's forbidden. It's a matter of fact, maybe not the wrong pronunciation, but the specific station that are included in the Helsinki Convention. When this document is read by the engineer, he says that it's okay to store, but when the lawyer is reading the document, she's saying that it's forbidden because of the name seabed. Seabed for the lawyer is everything under the ground, while for the geologic seabed is the part of the sea, and storing is under the sea, 1 kilometer minimum below. So this is the fact that the discussion is still ongoing.
Thank you, Agnieszka, very much. And as we have touched upon CFDs for quite a bit in the conversation, James Hewitt is asking, would contracts for difference fail badly if they allow the energy generator to stop generating when the market price rises above the strike price, implicitly when the need for energy and energy poverty issues are very great?
I'm not an expert in this, but my understanding is that this only works with fixed contracts of energy supply. So the projects have to show what's the cost of energy that they will have over the lifetime of the support. And therefore, I guess this would be covered by a contract, but I'm not an expert in this.
Thank you, Daniel. Alex, please come in.
Maybe just to briefly address this, I think carbon contract license also apply to production of goods. And indeed, usually there's no incentive to stop producing goods if the ETS price is high, because usually you will have other producers on the market which set the price facing this higher ETS cost. So you basically have, for instance, higher cement or steel costs on the market. So you can get higher premium from which you can pay back the carbon contracts for different costs. Although, and this is important design consideration, I think for up to now, the literature is not really facing the situation when you have very high ETS costs and universal uptake of decarbonization technology in a given sector. So the ETS cost no longer applies to a given sector because everyone has switched to CCS or other technologies. It's a quite specific consideration for design, but I think this it can be dealt with by adjusting the parameters of the contract. So technical issue, but fixable.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to join today's conversation. Thanks to wonderful audience for joining and for posting their questions. My apologies that we didn't get to all of them, but we will make sure that we will respond to them in writing after the webinar. We'll also follow up with the recording of this webinar and also the slides that Cory has been showing. And thank you very much. One thing that I want to mention is that we will be launching the CE Talks, a CE-wide project from October. So I encourage all of you to check this out. It will be exploring Poland, but also other countries in the region. And then please also look out for more webinars on the CCS, but also other topics from Clean Air Task Force. Thank you very much again for joining and have a lovely day.